Good day to everyone joining us at Slater United Methodist Church for our adult Bible study series. We are wrapping up the last 7 weeks that we have been looking at the Gospel of Mark, beginning in the middle of Mark, and today is our time with Mark. It comes to an end. It's the last 8 verses of Mark, so this would be chapter 16. As we've been going through Mark, we recognize that Mark seems to think little of human endeavors over and over and over again. He uses the foil of the disciples to illustrate how bereft of discipleship are human beings without God's grace, mercy, and guidance. The disciples say the right things most of the time, but their actions rarely match up with what they have vowed in terms of loyalty and steadfastness. So, as we get here to the very end of the gospel, the disciples have completely all abandoned Jesus. They're all gone. We don't see them at all. After Jesus is betrayed by Judas by a kiss, we see none of the other disciples again, with the exception of Peter. And Simon Peter, the way that we see him is he is standing below the praetorium, or where Pilate is interviewing Jesus or interrogating Jesus. And at that point, it is sort of an inquisition in a way. And what Peter does, after he said that he was willing to die with Jesus, and all the other disciples said they were in agreement, Peter denies Jesus before the cock crows. And then, of course, Peter remembers what Jesus has said, predicting that Peter will deny Jesus, and he sobs openly or weeps because of his shame and embarrassment of living right into Jesus' words. After Jesus is crucified, Joseph of Arimathea puts Jesus into his tomb, which evidently he has bought and prepared beforehand. And so now we begin, after the burial of Jesus, in talking about what happens when the women come to the tomb early the next morning. Now, one of the things that happens with tombs in the ancient world is that after someone is entombed or interred, there will be a large stone or rock rolled across the entrance of the tomb. Sometimes it's a cave, sometimes it's been hewn out of stone, but whatever it is, the rock is rolled in front of it, and it takes 3 or 4 or 5 men to do such a thing. This kind of technique was also used to protect wells. We see in the book of Genesis, for example, that several times the hero, which it could be Jacob, it could be Isaac, they roll away a gigantic stone from on top of a well so that people can get into it. But generally speaking, those are feats of great strength. And most of the time, a tomb, for instance, like this, would take 3 or 4 grown, strong men to roll the stone away. Why did they put stones in front of tombs? It is to protect the tomb from robbers, or to protect the tomb from animals which might scavenge the remains of the deceased. So they rolled the stone across, and the women the next morning, of course, the previous night, they had followed Joseph of Arimathea and probably a few other people who had helped Joseph entomb Jesus. and rolled a stone across. So the women knew exactly where the tomb was, and that's an important point. In fact, that's the last verse of the previous chapter. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where the body was laid. So that explains to us how they knew where to go. And then we begin. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. That is, anoint Jesus' dead body. Now, what's important to realize now is the way that Mark puts the male disciples, the 11 now, because Judas, of course, is no longer a disciple, that Mark puts the male 11 disciples up against a picture of the women, who at this very point at the beginning of chapter 16 look very, very faithful. They have come to perform one last service to their Lord, which is to anoint his body for burial. Anointing of a body for burial in the first century is very similar to the way that we would embalm bodies today. Bodies begin to decay quickly, and there's a stench and an odor. If we read the story of Lazarus in John's gospel, there's a verse in there that said the body will stink, or the body will soon stink. It doesn't sound very Bible-like, but it's very descriptive of what would happen. And so these women bring the spices so that they can anoint Jesus' body. And they come right after sunrise, as you see in verse 2. They come to the tomb because they know where it is. But they were saying to each other, who's going to roll the stone away from the entrance for us? They had anticipated this problem, and as they're walking to the tomb, talking early in the morning, they're asking, who's going to take care of the stone that is across the entrance of the tomb, because we cannot get in to anoint the body unless we can get past the stone. Now, some scholars say this is a ridiculous question for somebody to think of on their way to the tomb. They should have anticipated this problem earlier. But there are other scholars that believe, and this is what I think, is that Mark intertwines, he weaves this particular question that the women are asking out loud to one another in order to heighten the suspense. What's going to happen when they get to the tomb and there's a stone, a large rock in front of it? What are the women going to do? And Mark does this to heighten the drama of the moment. So Mark's into drama. There are many dramatic moments in the book of Mark, and this is one of them. And so they keep asking this question as they go to the tomb, bringing the spices to anoint Jesus' body. Finally, in verse 4, we see, when they looked up, they saw the stone had been rolled away. And so suddenly, this problem that they have been discussing the whole time that they've been on the way to the tomb, it's not a problem anymore. And yet, there are bigger problems that they had not anticipated. And the first one is, there is what Mark calls a young man sitting on the right side of the tomb, and he's all dressed in a white robe, and it startles them. It says they were startled. Another way to say that is that they were alarmed, or they were afraid. And so when they get there, the first thing that this robed young man says to them is, do not be startled, do not be afraid. And what's interesting in the Bible is that we have too many visions of Hallmark cards which have little winged pixie-like creatures flying about, and we think of them as angels. But if you notice in the Bible, when the angel comes to Mary to announce to her that she is with child, as we say, the first thing the angel says to Mary is, "Do not be afraid." There's another part of the Bible in Genesis where an angel comes to Hagar. And one of the things that the angel says to Hagar is, "Do not be afraid." There's another place in Matthew where an angel comes to Joseph in a dream, telling him not to be afraid to take Mary as his spouse. And so over and over again in the Bible, we see these words, "Fear not, be not afraid," and so forth, to the shepherds and other people in the Bible. And this makes us think that perhaps angels sometimes have sort of a fearsome look to them. Now, this young man clothed in white or robed in white probably doesn't look scary, but the circumstances make him scary. There's no body of Jesus. The stone has been rolled back. The tomb is empty except for this young man. And you wonder, who rolled the stone away? Did the young man? Did an angel? Did Jesus roll it away? Did God roll it away? We don't know, and Mark doesn't tell us. He allows us to read ourselves into the story and make some decisions about what happened and why it happened. So he tells them, don't be alarmed, and then he says something very prophetic. Now, they haven't said anything to this young man or this angel yet, but he says, "You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified." Now, this is interesting to me that he doesn't say, "You are looking for the Son of God," or "You're looking for the Son of Man," or "You're looking for the human one," which are different ways that Jesus' title is translated in the Gospel of Mark. What he says is, "You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth," in a kind of a human designation of who Jesus is. And then he calmly says, "Who was crucified." Doesn't say who crucified him, none of that business. It just says in a passive voice, who was crucified. And then he announces the good news: he has been raised. It's hard for us to understand the shock that these women must have received when this young angel-like young man tells them that they're looking for Jesus, who was crucified, and that he has been raised. He is not here. And then he shows them the place where they laid him. Today, when we get up on Easter Sunday morning and somebody like me or a leader of the liturgy or the worship service says, "He is risen," and then everyone responds, "He is risen indeed," I would guess that there's not one person in any sanctuary who hears those words that is surprised. He has risen. He has risen indeed. You don't ever see anybody faint and say, "Gosh, I wish someone would have told me this earlier." I mean, it's common knowledge. We all know this. But on that first Easter Sunday morning, the women come and think about what it is that they anticipate. First of all, that there will be a large stone in front of the tomb, so they won't be able to get in. And then when they come, there's no large stone in front of the tomb. The second thing is they expect to find the body of Jesus, and Jesus is not there. He has been raised, as the angel or the young man will tell them. They also do not anticipate the young man or the angel being there and telling them not to fear, and then explaining to them what happens. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. He is not here. He has been raised. This is where they laid him. He's no longer here. And so that's what the crux of this matter is. And for us to try to put ourselves back in the place of someone who has never heard about the resurrection, who's never thought about God resurrecting Jesus from the dead, to give him new life, to give us new life. These people had never thought about these things. Now, Jesus had hinted about these things. He has told them that he must be crucified or that he would suffer and die, and then 3 days later he would meet with them in Galilee. This is what Jesus says. Galilee is the place where the disciples and Jesus start their ministry. It's in the north. It's an area of Gentiles. It's as far north as you can get in Palestine. And so that is the place where Jesus will meet with them. So then the angel finishes the message to these women. Go tell his disciples, especially Peter. Peter, as you can remember from the past several chapters, is always sort of singled out as the main leader. Every now and then the sons of Zebedee, James and John, will assume sort of a first rank in the storytelling. But by and large, it's almost always Peter that does this. And so the angel, the young man, tells the women, go tell his disciples, especially Peter, that Jesus, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. So Jesus goes from the tomb and ends up going to Galilee. You will see him there just as he told you. And in several places throughout the gospel, Jesus has told them that he would meet up with them after his death in Galilee. They start the ministry in Galilee. They end the ministry on Golgotha and in this tomb. And then they restart the ministry again in Galilee. And so you notice what the angel does. He gives them very specific instructions. And we are so proud of these women. They're doing everything they possibly can to be helpful to Jesus. They're coming to anoint him. They're providing the last service for him. They're still around when all the other disciples have scattered everywhere. There they are. And we're doing pretty good with these women. We're thinking, atta girl. And then we run into the last sentence. After the angel, the young man has told them to go and tell the disciples, especially Peter, that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there just as he told you. What do the women do? It says, overcome with terror and dread, they fled from the tomb, and they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And so the fate of the women at the end of Mark is just like the fate of the disciples in the middle of chapter 14. All of a sudden, they just scatter to the four winds. No one sees them again. In Mark's gospel, now in Matthew, Luke, and John, there will be post-resurrection appearances by Jesus, but not here in Mark. It just finishes on this cold note that the women were terrified and they ran away, and they did not do what the angel or the young man told them to do, which to me sounds like directions directly from Jesus himself. Last time we were together, we talked about the three endings of Mark's gospel, so I will not repeat that now, but I do want you to know that Mark's gospel is a work of genius, and it really limits the ability of human beings to be good disciples, faithful disciples, loyal disciples, or steadfast disciples. It makes people look like all of us have clay feet. And the only way that we can survive as believers in Jesus Christ is to throw ourselves on the mercy and the love of God. And so I'd like to thank you for being with me today at Salado United Methodist Church. Next week, our Bible lesson will be on Psalm 104 if you want to read ahead and do your homework. So thank you very much.